So last week we started talking about how we can meet people with the gospel. At wherever stage of life they're at, we want to meet them emotionally, and we want to meet them with their interests and their hobbies, and where they're at intellectually as well. All of those things are incredibly important. And what's really neat is that Living Hope is putting on an event tonight, Thursday, the 22nd of April, which is hosted by Disciple a City, and it's going to give some really great practical tools about how to talk to people about Jesus, how to share the gospel, how to share what Jesus has done in your life. And it's a totally free event on Zoom. So if you don't have the link, talk to me and we'll get you hooked up.
My name is Al Westerman. I'm the youth pastor at Living Hope Church.
Perhaps you've seen tension rising in someone else's life. I say someone else's life because it's really hard to see these in our own life. And you see them walking down a path. You see them going in this direction. And it's not necessarily illegal or immoral or bad in any specific way, but you see it consuming them, and you see it heading in an inappropriate and an undesired location. This has happened in my life. I'm sure it's happened in your life as well. The problem is it's really hard to see it in ourselves. The way I kind of look at it is we have this mantle. We have, think of a fireplace mantle, and on it you have all these different shelves. Now, it's okay to have some of those things on the shelf. So some of the items like sports or health or hobbies or interests or shopping, or these aren't necessarily bad things. Where they are on the shelf matters, though. As Christians, we believe that what needs to be on the top shelf is God. We put God first, and that helps set the rest of the priorities. But it's really easy to find things taking the place of God. Now, we don't like to use the term idols, but God does say, "You shall have no other gods before me." You should have no other image or item replacing me that's higher than me on the shelf. So while it may be okay to have these things such as sports and popularity and movies or whatever your interests, hobbies, thoughts might be, we gotta be very careful of the order. And we see this really clearly in the life of the Israelites while they're in exile. But we see a brilliant summary of this in 1 Corinthians 10.
Paul, the author of 1 Corinthians, writes in verse 6 of chapter 10 that these things were written, and he's talking about the history of Israel. These things were written as examples so that you may not set your heart on evil things.
And I really hope that you read the whole chapter of 1 Corinthians 10. It's a really good one, and God will speak to you specifically if you do, and he'll get your own revelation, and you don't just have to hear mine. You'll get a much better one from the Lord himself. But he starts off by talking about pagan revelry. Now, for the Israelites, this was the cow. They made a sacred image of a cow, and I mentioned some of them. For me, I have the idol of health in my life, where I love being healthy, and that's a good thing, but sometimes it can take up too much of my time. It can take up too much of my mental space, or it can become an obsession, and it can get to an unhealthy place trying to be healthy. For you, it may look different. Now, here's the interesting thing, and I kind of already stated it, but it may not be a bad thing. Now, Paul says he doesn't want us to set our heart on evil things, but a good thing can become bad when it's handled improperly. We've probably heard the story of fire before. Fire in the fireplace, really good thing. Fire in the rest of the living room, that's a really bad thing. Paul continues to talk about sexual immorality. Now, this is in reference to the Moabites. The Israelites were, let's just say, commingling with the Moabites, and that was not what they had intended. God clearly told them that they needed to stop that. And this is actually a really interesting story in Numbers 25, where Phinehas, the grandson of Aaron, shoves a spear through two people. How are two people that close together? You'll have to read the chapter to find out. But the point is that sex too can be taken to a degree where it becomes unhealthy.
Now, all of these people were punished. The people that were falling into pagan revelry and the people who were falling into sexual immorality were punished, and they're to serve as examples.
And the last thing Paul chooses to make an example of is grumbling, complaining, and testing the Lord. And this is something that's really important to God. He talks about it several times throughout the Bible. I referenced it earlier on this year when I was talking about Philippians 2. And here we have it again. And this is the instance where the Israelites were grumbling and complaining. They're saying, oh, we were better off in Egypt back when we were in slavery. At least we got 3 meals a day. We didn't have to eat manna all the time, and all this whining and stuff. And God causes snakes to come. Now, this isn't a really interesting thing, and this is what I'm really hoping to get to, is that the complaining was bad, yes, but do you remember how the people that got bit by poisonous snakes were saved? Moses built a bronze snake, and he lifted it up, and he hoisted it up, and whoever looked upon the image of the snake was saved. Now, how many of you know what the medical symbol is? It's a symbol of a snake around a cross. Isn't that interesting? So now let's go into John, the book of John 3.
Starting at verse 14. Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the desert, so the Son of Man must be lifted up. Jesus talking about himself. That everyone who believes in him may have eternal life. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe stands condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of God's one and only Son. I had to keep reading. It was just so exciting.
The point is this. These things are to stand as examples, showing us the right way to not live so that we can understand the right way to actually live. But we're not going to meet the mark. We're not going to be able to measure up to what God's level is. My favorite verses of the Bible are Romans 3:23 and 24. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, or God's glorious standard. This we know, this we've established, but all are justified freely by the grace and redemption that comes from Jesus Christ. And that is something to celebrate. God knew we wouldn't be able to make the mark. He knew it back then, so whoever looked up at the snake that was raised up, they were saved. Whoever looked at the Son of Man who was risen up on the cross, if we look at him, we are saved.
And when I say look at him, I mean look to him for our source of salvation.
So going back to 1 Corinthians 10, I think if you were to ask most people who have a vague understanding of 1 Corinthians what the most popular verse is, they would say verse 13. And so if we read verse 13 in the context of what we've just described, it kind of takes a new meaning. Verse 13 is, no temptation has seized you except that what is common to man, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. Now, when we look at this in context, I think we can see that it's clear that it's not just talking about carnal temptations. It's not just talking about drugs. It's not just talking about cheating on your taxes or whatever. It's talking about where you set your heart. It's talking about where you set your intentions, because your life is always traveling in the direction of your most powerful thoughts. Where are your thoughts leading you? Where is your heart setting you? And where does the Bible say that we should put it? We look at that snake that has risen up. Better said, much better said, in fact, we look at Christ, who was risen up on the cross, who took the punishment that we deserved onto himself so that we can live in freedom. Set your hearts on something pure. Set your hearts on something that is going to bring you life, that is going to bring you joy. Set your hearts on Christ.